It used its power and influence to establish the United Nations and the Bretton Woods institutions and the Marshall Plan. That's what made America great. The Bush Doctrine and the War on Terror was a sharp break with the American tradition. It left the world leaderless, and the world is in disarray. The European Union can't possibly take the place of the United States as the leader of the world, but it can set an example for the world in international cooperation, both within its own borders and beyond. Indeed, it has already done so. The member states have delegated some aspects of their sovereignty in order to create a common market, and they kept the prospect of membership open to neighboring countries. And that prospect has been the most powerful tool in turning candidate countries into open societies. All that is needed now is for the people of Europe to be inspired by the idea of the European Union as the embodiment of the open society ideal and the prototype for a global open society. What this means in practice can be stated very clearly and concisely. The European Union needs to have a common foreign policy. That's the one part of the European Constitution that urgently needs to be rescued. In the meantime, the absence of institutional reform shouldn't be allowed to serve as a pretext for inaction. The European Union already possesses ample resources to make an impact on the world stage. Half of the world's overseas development assistance, the biggest single market in the world, 45,000 diplomats, almost 100,000 peacekeepers serving in every continent, and the prospect of using trade, aid, and the prize of membership as catalysts to encourage neighboring states to become open society. Regrettably, the European Union has not made full use of its potential. It has made little progress in formulating a common energy policy. As a result, it is increasingly dependent on Russia, and Russia has not hesitated to exploit its bargaining position. The EU has failed to give adequate support to Georgia or to impose adequate sanctions on Uzbekistan for the massacre in Andijan. The European neighborhood policy never gathered any momentum, and the treatment of Turkey is pushing an important ally in the wrong direction. Needless to say, a common European foreign policy should not be anti-American. Such a posture would be self-defeating because it would reinforce the division of the international community that the Bush administration has initiated. I am speaking about the European Union setting an example in international cooperation that eventually the United States, under a different leadership, which is on the way, would emulate. By the same token, a global open society cannot mean global government. Governments inevitably interfere with the freedom of the individual. A global government couldn't avoid being repressive, even if it were built on liberal principles. A global open society could not even be as closely integrated as the European Union, because the affinity among the member states would be less pronounced. What a global open society does stand for is the rule of law on an international scale. According to the neoconservatives who have exercised such a nefarious influence within the Bush administration, international relations are relations of power, not law. According to them, international law merely ratifies what military power has accomplished. To some extent, that is true today. For instance, the United Nations has ratified the occupation of Iraq, which has been brought about in an illegitimate way. But it ought not to be true tomorrow. International relations, including the exercise of military power, ought to be governed by international law more effectively than it is today. Europe, as the prototype of a global open society, is an abstract idea. Whether it is strong enough, persuasive enough to serve as the unifying force guiding the European Union forward remains to be seen. One thing is certain: the process that has carried the European forward so far cannot be revived in the same form as before. It was driven by an elite, and the population at large has felt left out. This can't continue if for no other reason than on account of the referenda, which expresses the people's will in a raw, capricious form without the intermediation of an elite. Therefore, if the European Union is to revive, it has to be by popular demand. One way or another, civil society has to be mobilized. How that can be done ought to be the subject of discussion at this conference. Speaking for myself, I can say that the idea of Europe as a prototype for a global open society is inspiring enough. Although I'm not a European citizen, I'm a believer in the open society. I have a network of foundations inside and outside the European Union committed to promoting that idea, and I'm ready to support an open society initiative for Europe, which would mobilize civil society behind the idea of Europe as a model and a force for a global open society. The world badly needs a more united Europe committed to the principles of open society, and I hope Europe will rise to the challenge. Thank you.